Before I start, I'm going to ask a question. Zach got asked 5 different directions, but I'll ask it the 6th way, and I'll give the short answer. So I've submitted kochia samples I've sprayed 3 times with glyphosate, and you told me it was not resistant. And just, again, reiterating, with glyphosate and the group 2, all the different sites or mechanisms of resistance, we don't always capture that. So there's that 0 out of 2 in Cass County. That's one where I was like, I wonder why this is resistant. It wasn't the mechanism they can test for, so it could be a non-target site mechanism. And so it's going to be an ever moving target. The one thing that we've shown very good consistency, near 100% alignment, which is better than any other phenotype by genotype testing I've seen, is with that group 14 resistance in kochia. That's been surprisingly good that it's target site, and we seem to hit that every time of response in the field or greenhouse versus the genotype. The other ones, there's more known mechanisms. Group 14 in kochia seems pretty reliable to that test. All right. A few things we're going to cover. Weed guide. Everyone here has one. QR code for those online. Also, every county office should have this available. One thing I want to highlight from the weed guide this year, for many this may be 1 year too late, as wet as we were in the eastern part of the state last year. Many fields I saw 3 different corn crops. So at page 31, just want to direct your attention here. In small grains for a number of years now, we've had a chart or a table showing product usage based on small grain growth stage. We've done the same thing for corn. So this is new to the guide this year, so hopefully that helps out making some product decisions, particularly in a challenging year. Thing I will point out with corn specifically, a lot of labels say corn height. The people I worked with, we went on growth stage. So there's an asterisk. A lot of these products are based on the typical approximation of corn height based on that growth stage. For instance, atrazine, basically 12 inches, that's about that V6. So as always, kind of refer back to the label if it's height or growth stage, but this should get you most of the way there. So hopefully people find that as a valuable addition. So tech crew, remind me, we're going to try me standing here for this or go to a speaker. All right, for everyone in the room, we should be able to hear this just fine, maybe a little bit loud because we're trying to get this on Zoom. For Zoom folks, if you can't quite hear it, we're going to drop a link in the chat. This is a video of the weed of the year. The YouTube link is also available in the back of the weed guide. So if you go online, get the PDF, you can copy and paste that link. But I figure, to my best approximation, we have never had a knight talk at the Wild World of Weeds before. And Sir David Attenborough's voice is a lot more soothing than mine is. So anytime I see a weed clip, I isolate it. So hopefully we'll enjoy this video.
Many of the ancestral grasses, like these wild oats, have a trick to ensure that their seeds are planted in the perfect place. Each seed head at the top carries 2 long bristles called awns. And when a seed drops the ground, these awns do something truly extraordinary. They walk. The awns twist as they dry out during the day, and then when they get wet, they untwist. Tiny hairs grip onto the ground, keeping the individual moving forward. In this way, the seeds work their way along the ground until eventually they find a rock to hide under, or a crack to dribble into.
All right, so always like to talk about biology of weeds. And BBC has a little bit better budget than I do for camera work. So figured I'd share that. If you've spent time in the undergrad, as an undergrad in the weed science lab, you've wet it and let dry wild oat seeds to see that on doing it by itself. But that brings up, Dr. Howard talked about this stuff will emerge from 5 inches deep, but it's still a problem in no-till. One of the reasons why we get cracks late in the summer, they can kind of wake their way towards a crack and corkscrew down in. So we've talked about that for a number of years. Kind of good to see someone with a much higher budget put that into work. So Brian Jenks referenced this. This is table 1 from the weed of the year. So this is the research from Minot. Basically the last, whatever it is, 7 years of samples being collected and sent into Brian to test for resistance. So again, kind of a targeted survey, suspecting we had resistance here. And just not going to spend too much time parked on this slide, but showing that for the most part, over this last period we've been testing, the population sent into Brian, we are finding some resistance. And so I don't know how much of this genotype DNA information is available for Zach, but certainly in the more recent years, as Brian's conducting this, as Kirk is, we're trying to also get some DNA to Zach, and that's going to hopefully help speed up the genetic test result. Dr. Howard presented this last year. This is also discussed in the Weed of the Year sheet, but just kind of showing whatever Brian presents usually, and Kirk has the same data he showed earlier of these targeted samples, and we're finding some pretty high levels of resistance in many cases. Kirk decided, and his crew kind of drove around the state a couple years ago collecting wild oat seed at random. So look, there's some under a power line, there's some on the edge of the field, trying to get more of a more realistic background of what resistance is out there rather than in a targeted field where we had some sort of failure of control. So this is table 2 in the weed guide and that page in the back. On the far right is the results from Brian's testing from seed collected in 2022 and tested in the greenhouse. That's that high, that targeted level of resistance, or what he was finding for percentages. The random column next to it, about twice the number of samples. That's what Kirk and his crew found driving around. And so can we still find resistance to every active we use? Yes, but at lower levels. And so again, just kind of providing that background information there. Just really wanted to highlight those key facts and have an excuse to show my video. Because my wife is definitely afraid of crickets, and she didn't know what I was doing at 10 p.m. at night trying to isolate that video because she thought I was looking at videos of crickets. So shifting gears, water hemp. This is just a distribution map where we know water hemp has been found in the state. So Greene County's at least one population. I know conversations with agents and other folks, and then crossing the border to the north, a lot more phone calls in this general neck of the woods going north of the border. And so water hemp is starting to spread up in Canada as well, in Manitoba. And so just kind of want to highlight there. Most of us, the valley, eastern third of the state, some of us, this is our top weed, but this is, again, just distribution for those folks interested. Zach showed the genetic test results. He said we do need to get together and marry together genetic test results with what we found through other sampling. I've done that already for group 14 resistance in water hemp. And so here's what we know of where we found resistance. Why are there some white counties in between the ones highlighted? As Zach said, we need some samples. I have no reason to suspect we have this nice bridge of no group 14 resistance. It's just a matter of sampling and how many samples we can get our hands on. So I'm going to spend a significant amount of time talking about residual herbicides and comparing a few years here. And so one main trial I wanted to highlight. So I've shown some residual herbicide research, particularly with the focus on water hemp for a number of years now, because we're just at that point for the first couple of years due to resistance, losing some tools in the toolbox for post-emergence control of water hemp. Now we have courts coming in from the other way, kind of taking away some products from us. And the bottleneck of EPA is pretty slow to get things registered because of all these new rules they have to follow and make sure we don't lose a product in court. So right, wrong, or indifferent, residual herbicides are as important now as they were in the 80s, and maybe more so, particularly for some of our resistant weeds. So from, I think, 2020 through 2023, there's a 4-year period. If you did not want it to rain, invite me to come out and put down a residual herbicide trial. 23 was the worst for us at our site. We put out our trial. We had less than a ½ inch of rainfall within the first 14 days after we put those applications out. It took us 4 weeks to get our first inch of rainfall, and it took 10 different rainfall events. Focus on the half inch, that's kind of that magic number we talk about for most residual herbicides, how much we want to activate them or incorporate them into the soil. 2024, until about May 12th, I was fielding questions on weed control and drought. And then I had all sorts of time for questions because we got flooded out at most of our sites. And we spent a lot of time in the office because it just kept raining in the eastern part of the state. And for those folks on the Fargo Clay, I don't need to repeat the year for us, but it was a pretty messy late May, early June period. So we did get our trials out right before that rainfall kicked in. So 2 days after we applied our pre's, we got an inch of rain, and then it kept raining. At our location just west of here, we got 6 inches in the first 3 weeks. We had some trials I'll highlight over in Glendon. We got 8 inches in that same time period. So then all of a sudden the question switched to, is my herbicide even still there? It's rare for us to get this much rain. Well, what can we expect when it finally dries out for weed control? So I'm going to show a large trial we have, and I'm going to separate the results out by year and point out some of the important themes. So you may remember I've shown this trial last year. It ends up being a big 20 treatment trial. And so what we were focusing on, Sarah highlighted the metribuzin rates titration experiment, and I've shown that up here for a couple years now as well. With that same trial, we have another student analyzing this across all the sites, but we were allowed to choose our own 1x and 2x rate of metribuzin. I just chose a 1/4 pound active as a 1x, and then a 1/2 pound is what we would call a 2x just for this trial. We had those 2 rates by themselves, and then we had all those 2 rates with all these different products. So we basically made our own Fierce with Valor and Zidua, had Surveil. Going down the list, Fierce MTZ, there's an asterisk that already has metribuzin in there. But if you use 1 pint and 1/4 of Fierce MTZ, you don't get a 1/4 pound active of metribuzin. So we spiked in some more to get up to those rates we were going after. And then some more regional flexibility. We did do 4 fluid ounces of Spartan, just kind of picked a rate we were hoping most people might be using in soybean. And it was legal at the time, but then we used a 1/2 pound of dicamba pre. So again, that gets into 20 treatments. So that last slide, the chart from top to bottom, that's now our treatments from left to right on the x-axis. So MTZ1, that's for 1x, 1/4 pound active. MTZ2, that's at 1/2 pound rate. And then all those different combinations. So this is 2023. Again, pretty dry situations set up for this trial. 4 weeks after planting, what I've done here is highlighted within that box all the treatments that were statistically the best. Basically, this time, 86% or greater. What's getting us there? That 86 on the far right, that's that Fierce MTZ without additional metribuzin spiked in. Basically, every other case, it's going to be where we had that 1/2 pound active of metribuzin or a 1/4 pound with at least 2 effective active ingredients. That's what got us to the high part of that list in 2023. A few things I'm just going to kind of pick on or highlight, I shouldn't say pick on, because there's going to be some contrast compared to this year. The far right, dicamba, we've had in 4 years of testing about 70 to 80% control residual on water hemp. One of the most water-soluble herbicides we have, so it's done pretty good in dry years. Pay attention to that one when we go to 2024. The middle here, and we're going to spend some time through a bunch of different slides focusing on Zidua pyroxasulfone. 2023, about 20% control. Always highlight this as one of the best pigweed herbicides from a spring residual standpoint. Brian showed you some data of mine earlier today that it was the best thing we used. That was 2024 data. 23, a product that does require a little bit more moisture, a little bit less control that year. Switch gears, here's 24, same set of data. So again, dicamba now, we cut that control about in half. Zidua, 96% control, and we got 6 inches of rain. So some of this, when we're relying on a single active ingredient, the water solubility of the product can put us at risk to the environment. What's still good in 2024? Let's see, Fierce MTZ, 3 effective active ingredients against pigweeds. Any of those where we have a 1/4 or 1/2 pound of metribuzin plus 2 effective active ingredients. Getting more effective active ingredients out there, dry year, wet year, those products rose to the top. And so this is We talk about mixing multiple effective active ingredients for resistance management. You can also maybe call it weather management as well. And it's really good to have that contrast of the 2 years to show that this plays out as well. Just taking this kind of further out, 6 weeks, we kind of tightened up, add another 2 weeks to the season. Some of those good treatments kind of dropped off a little. Usually the ones on the right side of the chart where we don't have that right rate of metribuzin or the single effective actives. 2024, again, dropped some products, but 6 weeks after planting, residual in this case, one of the best products. So get that product on a pigweed and turn the water on until you've got 3 board grad students that have taken every training NDSU has available to offer, and that product is great. So pictures from 2023, just kind of want to show some comparisons here. The left side, that's a non-treated check. The right side, that's our flumioxazin. In this case, we did use Valor picture 6 weeks after treatment. There's pyroxasulfone. That's what that looked like in 23 during the dry year. And then just showing that Furious MTZ in that dry year, the 3 effective active ingredients. Could not find my pictures from this year. There was one with, I think one of my grad students was in a raft getting to their trial behind it, so did not include that. So a couple things I just wanted to talk about with residual herbicides is water solubility. Mentioned once or twice earlier this year, and so earlier today, I should say. On the left side, that's by active ingredient. Most of our residual herbicides we use in soybean. Trade name associated to the next column to the right. Water solubility, milligrams per liter. The general rule of thumb, the higher that number is, the more water soluble. If it's below 100, we tend to call that lower water solubility. Above 1,000 is highly soluble. In between, kind of that medium range. So again, we mentioned this, but just kind of showing what's the highest number on that chart. Dicamba at 4,500. Most water-soluble herbicide we could have used. Lowest, trifluralin, Treflin, 0.3. Very water-insoluble. One of the 2 reasons, really, why we incorporate that product to get it down where we need it. Also can have some UV degradation of that product. The one I'll highlight a little bit, if I remember to, when I get to the data slide, is sulfentrazone. That one's interesting. That water solubility will actually change based on your pH. A lot of this work is pH of the water solution, but a lot of pH capacity in soils, and so that can change with our pHs of our soil as well. Get to a higher pH, that solubility goes up. Keep that in mind about 3, 4, 5 slides from now whenever I get there. Just if you want to focus specifically on the group 15s, that's what this chart is. Forgot to mention this, the last slide, the one really big caveat is acetochlor. That is looking at the corn acetochlor products, non-encapsulated. We don't have publicly available data on the encapsulated things like Warrant, and Versa is a new one from Corteva this year. So the encapsulated products don't have a similar set of data talking about the water solubility. But we're going to need some additional moisture to break that encapsulation. So that is the caveat I forgot to point out for acetochlor. And then I like to put a couple of different premixes we might use on the screen. Just kind of going back to remember the results of we had a couple of different effective active ingredients. Why I'm going to pick on Furious MTZ, or again point out Furious MTZ, flumioxazin, metribuzin, pyroxasulfone, all very effective on water hemp. Different water solubilities. And so we have a lot of rainfall. Maybe that's when we get flumioxazin and pyroxasulfone really carrying the load for us. A dry year, metribuzin has some pretty good water solubility. That may be the one to kick in and really get our weed control going for us. And then we'll get some more rain. Eventually, we'll get some more mileage out of flumioxazin and pyroxasulfone. So when we're developing pre-mixtures or our own tank mixes, we want the effective active ingredients, but there is some additional logic behind why companies will package certain ingredients together. This will go out and look really good, whether it's in Fargo, North Dakota in 2024, or Larned, Kansas, and what I assume is always a drought in Larned, or go to the Eastern Corn Belt. So they're also wanting this to be a good product across a wide geography. Water solubility is a part of that. Here's the slide Brian showed from earlier. The other piece of the story. So, yes, I have pigweeds. Brian had foxtail. I had 6 inches of rain. Brian had 1 inch of rain. I wish we had these same 4 treatments out, and I'm probably going to put these out every year from now on, which probably guarantees 6 inches of rain in May every year from now on. But really just wanted to look at this over time because on those drier years, dual metolachlor and then Outlook dimethenamide are more water soluble. And so they're going to do a little bit better in dry years, especially very dry situations. Wet year with plenty of rain, there's either the Warrant, where we had to break the encapsulation, or Zidua, that's not very water soluble, really did shine in these years. The other piece of data I'm going to be adding from now on into the future, because it really kind of helps rounds out the picture, I think. We can always talk about biomass or density and weed control trials, but a lot of our post-emergence labels for things like water hemp and kochia, 3-inch weeds or smaller. So how long does it take to get to a 3-inch weed? So where we applied no herbicides, simply started clean. Again, big caveat for out of those 44 days, 22, this trial was a little bit underwater. But we gained about a week across all herbicides. So let me back up. 93% control out of Zidua, just picking on that one on the left. Outlook, 50% control. Just a 2-day difference on 3-inch weeds. And so I just want to point out that just because we have some really good weed control, we're still going out there about the same time to make that post-emergence application, because those ones that do escape are going to grow roughly the same time frame. This does get more complex when you get into 2, 3, 4 effective sites of action. And so that's why I said I wish we had more data on this. We're going to collect more moving forward. But comparing the group 15s, basically we were able to alter the weed density based on the product, but we got to the need to spray a post-emergence product about the same time on the calendar. So pretty water hemp heavy so far. I'm going to have, I think, one more residual slide for water hemp, and then kind of look at some other weeds. So funding from the Soybean Council, we've taken a core group of treatments and basically put it at every REC that has a weed scientist. So really focusing in on metribuzin and sulfentrazone, weed control component, and crop safety. There's all the locations we have had trials this past year. Metribuzin, that 1/4 pound active, 1/2 pound active are the rates we chose. Sulfentrazone, 4 and 8 fluid ounces. So we can also, if you read a label on a heavy clay soil, we can go 12 ounces of sulfentrazone or Spartan. Looks really good. No one's really going to do it. So we know most people are on that lower end. So we'll look at that in that little bit higher rate, because we can get some utility out of going with a higher rate. So this is just one slide. Water hemp control, 6 weeks after planting. Gold bar is Glendon, where we have a sand with high pH. Remember what I just said about water solubility of sulfentrazone in high pH soils, plus 8 inches of rain on a sand. Few different moving targets there. Green bar is Fargo. So again, a pretty heavy clay soil with some standing water at times within that 6-week period. In general, from left to right, it's metribuzin, that 1 and 2x, sulfentrazone by itself, and then the various tank mix combinations. For the most part, metribuzin was really performing better, getting to the tank mixes for better weed control. Glendon gets to 6 weeks after in that environment on a sand, 8 inches of rain. 50% control was looking pretty good that year with 2, all things considered, water-soluble products. Not shown here, we had a different trial out there, and as that grad student would tell you, Warrant was the MVP of his trial, because in that scenario, that high rainfall environment, that was the best product in that particular trial that we had. Didn't have all group 15 products, but in that case, that was a product that performed well in a different trial, just 20 feet down the turn row from this trial. Other weeds, kochia. Gold bar is Hettinger, so Caleb put this out. Green bar is Carrington. Mike Osley had the same trial out. So 2 different locations for kochia. More or less, metribuzin, 1 and 2x, about that 75 to 85% control, again, 6 weeks after planting. Sulfentrazone, a bit of a difference. Caleb saw about 80% control. Rate didn't quite matter. Mike had a little bit of some issues with sulfentrazone. Mike may have PPO resistance. We're still kind of getting through that one, but difference by site when we just look at sulfentrazone by itself. Tank mix is generally a little bit better there. So again, Caleb getting 100% kochia control 6 weeks after planting, we'll take that. You're probably wondering, well, what about crop safety when you have those too high rates? We're going to get there. Foxtail control. I'm talking about products we typically say are broadleaf herbicides, right? I'm not just telling you the bar is yellow. I'm saying that's yellow foxtail that Brian had. Hedinger, that's not just the bar is green. Caleb had green foxtail. So comparing the two foxtail species, metribuzin, Minot, pretty rate dependent, 40 to 85% control based on the rate of, so again, metribuzin control of yellow foxtail. Caleb was seeing that 75 to 82% range on green foxtail and Hedinger. Sulfentrazone, 10 to 40% sulfentrazone in, on yellow foxtail from Minot. That's been my general experience with yellow foxtail, barnyard grass, when I worked in giant foxtail country, any panicum species. Any given year, I say sulfentrazone is a 10 to 30% grass control product. So we don't think about it for grass control, but it helps in these premixtures. Caleb was living right down in Hedinger, 80 to 83% control out of sulfentrazone on green foxtail. Different tank mixtures. Again, if we look at this high rate, both of them right about 90% control with that higher rate of both products on foxtails for what we typically call broadleaf weed control products. So we've talked quite a bit about resistance within foxtails to post-emergence products. Again, residuals are going to be pretty effective, not just the group 15s. Some of these other products we don't typically think about as grass products. Crop safety, no real big charts to look at. Not a lot going on for the crop safety part of this trial, which is a good thing. So some additional information, we actually had 2 soybean varieties for crop safety. One is listed as tolerant to metribuzin, sensitive to the PPO inhibitors, and the second variety was the opposite of that. No difference between varieties at any site, so they all look the same. Never saw sulfentrazone injury, so 8 fluid ounces at Nesson Valley and Williston. No injury from sulfentrazone. Where did we see injury? Basically, 2 locations, and much like Sarah Lancaster showed, in that case, less than 10% across 50 site years across the U.S. We had less than 10% injury on metribuzin at 2 locations. Again, Glendon, that sandy soil, high pH, 8 inches of rain, and Minot had a hint of injury that ended up going away. End of the season, yield differences. Only 1 location at Fargo, where we had the clay, that water was standing for about 3 of the first 6 weeks. That high tank mix, so the 8 ounces of sulfentrazone, the half-pound active of metribuzin, that's the only time we saw a yield loss out of those, whatever it was, 7 locations, all the different rates. Everyone did have on, thinking back to the data, between 2 and 8 inches of rainfall within the first 3 weeks of application. This is getting put out again next year, and so we will capture more environments, and we'll be presenting the full results probably at this meeting next year. A set of slides I showed last year, but just want to highlight once again from post-emergence standpoint. Focus here is water hemp. Do need to spend some time in the next month or 2 data mining for kochia as well. But in this case, this is from my program, all at our main location in Fargo. Every time we sprayed soybean herbicides on 3 to 4 inch tall water hemp. So over a 5-year period, that's over 500 times we sprayed the 4 products there on the screen. 300 or so times is where all we did was plant, let the water hemp get to 3 inches tall, and then come in and spray. The other 200 or so is where we had some sort of residual herbicide, and then came back when those plants were 3 inches tall, and then spray these post-emergence. So glufosinate in list 1, so 2,4-D was always in list 1, the tank mix of the 2, and then, again, when we could, dicamba or Ingenia at the appropriate half-pound active rate. Create a box and whisker plot out of this. So the number on top, that is the average weed control over all evaluations. The whiskers are the maximum and the minimum. So if I look at glufosinate on the left, if all we did was plant, come back when water hemp was 3 inches, spray glufosinate, we had a range of 40 to 100% control out of all the observations, on average about 80%. And there's the growth regulators and the tank mix as we go right across the screen. Again, following any sort of the average number goes up, those whiskers get a lot tighter, and basically the lowest observation we saw in that case was 80% control from, in this case, it was dicamba. Pretty consistent on that tank mix of glufosinate and 2,4-D on water hemp. So need to add in this year's data. The only thing that should change is the average on the tank mix might go down a little bit to like 98%. But otherwise, same consistent message for 2024 results. Got about a minute or two left, so I just wanted to highlight this because I promised Tom Peters I would, so got the data pulled together for him. Reviton or tiafenacil has now been on the market for a few years. One of the things I've been interested in is what about looking at that product from the desiccation market or for the desiccation market. The caveat here, this is not a labeled application. Why did we look at this? I'll show again real quickly or coming up shortly. Reviton and Sharpen, so tiafenacil and saflufenacil, pretty close molecules, really just a side chain is what makes a difference from a molecular standpoint for those products. Labeling, the Reviton label basically says there's no residual for weed control. Sharpen, higher rates, we can get residual weed control. What Tom's interest is, and part of mine, is crop rotation based on the label. So here is the Reviton label, and again, highlighting Tom's interest, sugar beet down there, 1 ounce of Reviton, 30 days to sugar beet, 2 ounces, same thing, double that if you go up to 3 ounces. Part of the interest is we'll have dry bean rotation into sugar beets. If you look at the Sharpen label, and did I highlight it? No, I didn't. So let me get my magic marker out here. That's sugar beet. That's 1 ounce, 4 months, 2 ounces, 5 months. That's 3 ounces of Sharpen up to 6 months. So we're in that 1 to 2 ounce range for desiccation and dry bean. 4 to 5 months, if you look at the Sharpen label, don't count the time the soil is frozen. So we've had some cases where, in this case, you can't really call it carryover. We didn't follow the label. Not enough time between that desiccation in September and then planting sugar beets the following April. So what if Reviton looks just as good without that residual risk and we can plant sugar beets? That's just comparing the two. So I've got 3 years compiled. I'm going to show 2 years of data here. So looking primarily on pinto beans, and I'm looking at the effect on the dry beans themselves. So getting the crop ready to harvest. Not looking at weed control data. That's where we can get some differences between Sharpen and Reviton. But looking at 1 and 2 ounces of Sharpen compared to 1 and 2 ounces of Reviton. So use rate in the field, 1 ounce is an ounce, is typically what we talk about from a burn down perspective. The only time we saw a difference was in 2022, 3 days after application. The 2 rates of Reviton were actually a little bit better at knocking leaves off of dry beans than 1 ounce of Sharpen. That 2 ounce rate of Sharpen was similar to Reviton. Basically the same numbers on getting the pods to the right color and desiccating the stems. Going out to 10 days later when we might be thinking about harvesting, basically complete or near complete desiccation, regardless of the rate of either product. 2023, at 3 days after, they were basically the same product once again. So have been sharing this data and having some conversations with the registrant of Reviton, seeing this could be an additional thing to add to the label. There's all sorts of considerations that go into that. But as far as finishing the crop off, tiafenacils look pretty good on legumes. And again, there might be some differences or for crop rotation there. So we talked about this enough earlier. Contact info, weed guide again.